Good morning, everybody. This is Greg Thode and John Walker with Insurance Restoration Laboratory on our third episode, and we think we have an interesting topic for you today on underinsured properties. And so brought this idea up to John. I know he, having the knowledge of in the background of how insurance companies write their policies and set your policy limits and things of that nature, and your secondary coverages for outbuildings or what would you call it?
The other structures is what we call it.
Yeah, other structures. Drawing a blank there. And the reason I brought this up was we are seeing more and more of this, and I don't know that it's across the United States, John, but more and more of the claims we're seeing are policies that have not kept up with the times. And it's leaving homeowners in a very, very vulnerable position, and business owners too. And so looking at some of the policies that we do when some of these people have had major catastrophes, I'm not talking about the water loss kitchen, bathroom, $10,000, $20,000 project. I'm talking the $300,000 to one we have right now that's at $1.4 million. And they literally don't have enough insurance to cover their losses. Wow. Because they've had these old policies that they've just never reviewed. Either their agent hasn't reviewed or the homeowner hasn't reviewed. A lot of times I think people more and more, which we've mentioned in the past, is that people are just looking at what's the cheapest insurance, right? You go and buy a new home, and you're like, I've got a 3,000 square foot home, mutual and claw, how much? And they're like, $1,100. And then you're, hey, State Farm, how much? $1,000. And they're not digging deep into seeing what their coverage actually is. And so, if anything, your takeaway today, I'm hoping that people will actually get their policies out, call your agent. Your agent's your friend, and you want to have that relationship with them. And really dig deep into what your true coverage is compared, and then you're going to have to find out in where you live, does that coverage fit to rebuild?
Right.
As I'm telling you right now, I would say that probably 20-30% of the claims we're up against right now, the people are well underinsured. We're in the Seattle market. It's a very expensive market to do work in. And you have a bureaucracy in the government here, especially in King County, that runs you through all these different phases just to get a permit. And so a lot of these things factor into cost of living, and what contractors are charging to get the work done. So
yeah, and I think there's a lot to it, because there's a misconception. I'm sure insurance companies do want you to be. I mean, the idea of insurance is to put you back where you need to be, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, there is a race to it, to the policies that they, save this, and you really are robbing yourself of coverage.
Right.
In most cases, there's a certain amount you can do with the shopping a policy. But really, when you do go to some of these other carriers with a lot lower rates, you are selling yourself a little short. You got to look at what you're doing. I think one of the examples that you had given me this week was that a company would give you coverage on your what's called coverage A. Coverage A is your main structure. It's where you live. It's where you drive your car in when you're on your way home from work. You park your car in the garage and you walk in, and there's your kitchen and your family room, and that's where you live. That's coverage A. That's your structure. Right. And then there's this coverage B, which is maybe a shed, or sometimes there's some fences involved, etc. And usually that they might scrimp and save in that department. So you need to keep an eye on that. If you have a larger structure on your property that's a coverage B, or an other structure rather than coverage A, you might have an issue. And so we started talking a little bit about your situation, and you recognized we had a big storm blowing here a couple weeks ago.
Right.
That knocked our power out. Our power was out for 5 days.
Oh yeah, that was. I'm sorry for anybody on the Florida, down in the Panhandle, anything. We're whining about something that you guys are probably laughing about. 5 days no power. You're like,
right. Oh my goodness.
My next door neighbor, I had a tree on my property fall down during the windstorm and hit his garage. It's a detached garage, so it falls under that coverage B. And being in the industry, although I didn't want to do the work for him, I told him, let me go ahead and write a scope for you. And so I didn't know what his policy limits were. He does pretty well. I kind of figured he'd have whatever coverages that he needs. And got done, and I was at like, I want to say 22.5, new roof, couple trusses, some siding, brickwork, a lot of things on a garage door. And there was a lot more mechanical stuff that had to happen to rebuild it, that drove up that cost. And he called me. He was all excited. He goes, man, they covered everything. And I am really lucky because I found out I only have $25,000 of coverage on this garage. And it's a 30 by, I would say, about 27 square foot garage, all beautiful garage. And I'm looking at the replacement cost on that thing. If that tree had actually made it through those couple trusses, what that damage would have been, he would have had he would have been out of pocket $25,000 to $50,000. And I'm swagging it because I didn't even get into it. I was just lucky. And the reason I was lucky is because, and I'm not saying his name or where I live, but he has 2 cars in there that are probably worth about $500,000.
Right.
And now I'm like, I hope you have those insured properly also.
Good point.
That tree, if it had been one of my other trees on my property, could have taken out both those cars, and that would have been devastating. I would have felt horrible for him.
Yeah, and that's really, it just, so the moral of the story is call your agent, make sure, and they do this. My agent emailed me last week, said, we'd like to check in with you, make sure we're on the same page. We want to make sure there's no changes to your policy or no changes to your conditions of your home or anything like that. Those really are, I think it seems annoying, right, but it's really important to do. And we talked a little bit about contents in our pre-show filming, but it's, they sometimes set a value of your contents based on the value of your home or the percentage of that. Right. Now, there's a few things you need to be aware of in a homeowner's policy. I had a friend of mine just recently had an e-bike, and that e-bike had all of a sudden failed, and he filed a claim with his company, and they said, sorry. While he's on the phone, they go, we sell an e-bike policy,
You're kidding.
And it's, I didn't know how much of it. It's probably really cheap, but we sell an e-bike policy. Unfortunately, under his homeowner's policy, the claim was denied. They denied it. They said, we don't cover that.
Right.
So if you have some special toys, a ring,
Jewelry.
any ring, jewelry, guns, ammunition, not ammunition, maybe ammunition, but guns, collector's items, you need to be talking to your agent about that, because I see this a lot, even with the flood, because flood is really catastrophic as far as it takes everything out. Same with a fire, right? It'll take everything out. It'll melt your stuff. And if you have a collection of something or antiques of any nature, you need to go talk to your agent and make sure it is exactly that it's covered, especially if it's anything of value. And a diamond ring policy is maybe an extra $12 a year or something like that.
That's what I think people are really nervous about. And you'll know by asking. To up your policy to cover the items you have is very minimal.
Yeah.
I mean, it is so minimal, and you think you're never going to use it, but when you have to. He mentioned guns, jewelry. I'm lucky enough that my wife doesn't have a lot of jewelry, but she has won a couple of very expensive deals, and all we had to do was get a jeweler to appraise the value of those.
Right.
And we just gave it to the insurance company. And like you said, I think it was $9 more to cover, a $5,000 diamond set.
It's cheap.
So,
it's cheap. Same thing with renters. You run across commercial property claims all the time, I'm sure. And I run across them as well. And I would say less than 50% of tenants in an apartment or condo have renter's insurance.
Yep.
Do you know how much renter's insurance for $50,000 in things? And you think, that might be a lot. 30,000, 50,000. You'd be surprised at the stuff you accumulate in your lifespan. And you move in, think about if you moved in a U-Haul truck and you have a 15-foot truck, it's probably $30,000 to $50,000 worth of stuff.
Absolutely.
Right? And some people make that risk. And again, that's the whole premise of insurance. It's risk and reward. You're betting on yourself.
Right.
And just go get a renter's policy. I mean, it's got to be anywhere between $10 and $20 a month, maybe.
The most expensive one I've seen was $21 a month. And that was for, I want to say like 90 some odd $1,000. And the person had to use it.
Yeah.
And most of the damage, you think you're never going to use it, but the damage was caused by the unit next door. And you're thinking, well, they caused it, they owe. No, you're covering your stuff as a renter. You're covering your stuff as a homeowner also. But yeah, you brought up renter's insurance. And I do see, though, property managers have been very, over the last 10, 15 years, they've been, a lot of times they will not even let you rent unless you have proof of renter's insurance.
Well, what does a restoration company do if someone comes in and they say, well, you guys probably come in after the fact most of the time, but you've had experience with that.
Yeah, we dealt with that quite a bit. And I tell you, to be honest with you, it was very tough because you either you had I don't want to say a good adjuster, but you would have an adjuster that understands that you needed to move items out of the way that were totaled.
By the way, there's a lot of good adjusters out there. I'll just say that much.
I know there are. Well, what I mean is, I don't want to say a good adjuster would do this. Because
right.
Even I guess an adjuster that would be willing to look at the big picture. And typically, again, we always talk about how do we come to agreements, and how do we, work through stuff. The war story would be that one of the last buildings that we rebuilt with my old company, none of the renters had renter's insurance.
Oh.
I think maybe one person out of 9. It was a smaller apartment complex. And but in order to get in to estimate and rebuild the structure, we needed the contents out of the way. And the delay that was going to be caused, loss of revenues, loss of this, loss of that to the insurance carrier, the adjuster said, okay, look, I'll tell you what, I will pay for 2 40-yard dumpsters. You get the tenants to sign off. We're going to pay for you to dispose of it. Keep it tight, but do whatever you can. And so we, got everybody to sign off except for one guy that was just adamant he was keeping everything, and it was all just sooted black. I didn't understand it, but hey, more power to you. And the carrier, they understood that, again, that whole tripping over dollars to pick up pennies. And what that did was facilitate probably the job bumping up, meaning like shorten make it so we could get the job done by about 2 months, because we weren't sitting there. Once we told a renter that, hey, they're going to take care of it, but in order to be taken care of, you have to allow us to start by middle of next week. Talk to your attorney, talk to whoever you have to, but all of your contents are ruined. We'll photo document everything for you. We're not going to do a major inventory. You can be there in case there's anything you want to keep, and the carrier paid for it, and boom, we got an estimate, we got approved scope, and we went for permitting and engineering.
Nothing's better than having a closed and finished project.
That's right.
And or claim.
That's right.
Right. So find a way to communicate your needs, and like you said, you told the carrier or your adjuster and said, hey, look, you can either pay this small amount.
Right.
We'll be reasonable about it. Because some people see that as a carte blanche, and then they go, all of a sudden you got $100,000 content demo bill, and you're like, bro, I just, sorry, that's my son. I've been hanging around my 12-year-old.
No,
He calls me bro all the time.
All they do is say bro.
And I'm like, okay. Yeah. So we'll keep that in there just for my son, because he'll get a kick out of it if he ever watches this ever. But it's communicating. You're like you said, it's just getting into that right spot, and they can spend less money, just in some ways bending it. And I think most carriers will say, hey, if we're just getting rid of it, we're good. Just go do that. If you're reasonable about it. And so, yeah, I think again, the motive is to get it done fast, get everyone back in the same spot. That's everyone's mutual desire. is
It
to
should
get
be.
it done.
It should be.
Right.
I think too often people get caught up in the quagmire of everything. If we can pull it back though to the underinsured stuff, going back to, we covered a lot of contents, and I think the reason we were going on to contents was due to valuations
Right.
and how what you could possibly do if you find that you're underinsured is to get a good inventory of your contents. What we find, and John alluded to was, a percentage of the value of your home. So if you have a $300,000 home coverage A policy, and they say 30% of that's covering your contents, you have $90,000 worth of coverage. So with that being said, what you'll find is that if you have a total loss, all of a sudden your carrier either will have a contents company. Some of them still do. A lot of them don't. They rely on third parties, and they'll do an inventory. And you want to really review that heavily. And a couple of reasons there is to get the value for what you were owed, not any more, not any less. And what we find is there's a lot of companies, again, that are tied at the hip with some people, and they just kind of throw out general items, right? And maybe they're not looking at that it's a Nike or a Jordan set that was $1,200. And getting a proper inventory photo document, I really, really think most people should just walk around and videotape their home. And I know you don't want to show it to anybody, but clean your home, go through, videotape all of your open cabinets, the food in your refrigerator, your bookshelves. My wife's an avid, all she does is read. And I mean, our books on those shelves it's insane.
Yeah.
And
The garage, don't forget your garage.
your garage.
Your tools.
Right.
Some of it can be clean, but again, it's just having a knowledge of it. There's the smart people, if they see a hurricane coming their way, they go through and videotape. They'll videotape their house and the contents in it to make sure that they can document the condition of things before. And so that, in many ways, is the reason we talked a little bit about that, is just to make sure if there's, again, for the policyholder. So the policyholder is to help them get what they are owed, but sometimes they might have smaller coverages. And there are some endorsements on the better policies that you can get. They might have an endorsement that says, we actually have a little bit more in case you are over limits.
Right.
And they'll have that built in. It's a small endorsement to make sure you're protected that way. And so, again, it's just being aware of what it's at. And then as a contractor, right, is knowing what the policy is. You were telling me before the show is that there's some jobs that you won't even take it unless you have a copy of the policy and you have a contract and you know that there's no complications to it.
Right.
And that's something you can afford to do when you are established, somebody that knows what they're doing, and they're in their niche of work. And then this contractor, some of these contractors and these restoration companies are coming in and they're hungry, and then they take on some of these jobs that might have some limitations. You might have an asbestos limit. You might have a mold limitation. You might have various amounts of circumstantial limitations.
Right.
And how would you navigate?
Mold is a big one. Mold is a big one. That came in years ago. We did mold forever, and it was kind of an open check. You still had to write your estimate and get it approved. And the carriers, because of the hysteria around mold, started writing it. They couldn't write it out of their policy, but what they were doing was dropping down the coverages to $5,000 or $10,000 just across the board. And so you would have a restoration company come and say, you have mold everywhere. We had a hygienist test. This is your indoor air quality, outdoor air quality. Here's our proposal. And you would run through it. If you did that today, you could run into major issues because some of these losses can be, 25, 55, 75,000 easily to do them. And if you only have $10,000 in coverage, you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
Yeah, and I do. And people are upset by it, and I get it. But a saying that they would say in the insurance industry is that insurance coverage is not a maintenance plan.
Right.
Typically, the mold is a result of a continuous seepage of an item that causes moisture. And mold needs a few things to grow. It needs to be dark. It needs to be dark and damp and have oxygen I use a couple different. I use four instead of three, but it needs some amount of heat.
Right.
It needs something to eat. It needs
cellulose type material.
Right. And so typically a mold claim of that size is a result of something just not going.
That's right.
It's going unchecked. And so people mistake that for, insurance coverage is for sudden and accidental damages.
Right.
And so it's really hard. And there are some circumstances in which you don't have access to a property for a period of time and mold does set in. Right. The hot water line breaks.
In a crawl space. You don't know anything about it.
That'll happen. The mold will happen real quick, right? I mean,
it's a steam bath.
Yeah, it's literally, we were talking about saunas earlier. It's literally a sauna under there, in that section. So really I get it. And so as a restoration company, though, I'll see some restoration companies come in, and they either are, I don't want to say that they're dishonest, but they conveniently look the other way when they're writing an estimate as far as the mold is concerned, or there's ways to try. The people are trying to find coverage for it by either ignoring it, and I would never recommend the dishonest route, right? But that can cause some contention, and so knowing what you're going into, asking for those coverages and being aware of what coverage limitations there are is really important for a restoration company, I think.
Right. As you were saying that, and I know we're kind of not getting as deep into underinsured type deal, but it does connect. And so if you have the mold, let's say, if you've had a microbial growth and a company comes in, the easiest thing to do is say, give me a proposal. I'm going to send it. I am going to file a claim. In my home, my household, I have a decision I've set for me. It's anything under $10,000. I'm not filing a claim. We do see people get canceled for having multiple claims, and that will happen, guys. So just be aware of that. But a couple things, if you encounter some solutions that we came up with years ago, is that and this worked. And when you can, again, have a discussion with an adjuster, we would break out the items that were sudden and accidental,
yeah.
Right? And so you had a water line break. What was damaged by the water, right? And not put that under your mold coverage. And I don't question the insurance policy. I don't know how it works. I don't care too much how it works. I care more than ever now looking at so many underinsureds. But so much of the drying aspect, the negative air machine, that, you're using it for mold, but proper drying techniques when you're cutting out drywall, you want to control silica, you want to control dust. And you see pushback sometimes on air scrubbers, but they're key. And they act as an air mover also. So, if you really want to argue it, don't say pull the air mover, say drop a fan. Right? Drop one fan off. If you're going to have it right there, it's blowing the same way that fan was blowing. But if it's under negative air, it's pumping outside, right? So, but you can cover, you can take a $25,000 mold job and actually put $10,000, $12,000 towards the water damage if you can speak to the adjuster about what you want to do. And at the beginning, in the very beginning anyway, guys, if you think you have mold, first of all, get somebody to check it. Make sure that they check the air quality. That's key. Mold's everywhere. And this isn't a podcast on mold, but and then get that over to your adjuster if you decide to file a claim, and make sure that you have coverage. Secondly, if we can move on, would be water damages. I've seen this lately, massive water drying bills on home fires.
Right.
And I'm talking like $40,000, $50,000 bills for materials that are all going to be demolished and disposed of.
Right.
And some people will tell you, like, well, if you don't get them out of there, they're going to mold, right? Well, then the key is, let's get that demolition estimate approved right away.
Right.
And let's get in there. Let's agree, get, with the adjuster, using your Matterport, getting the adjuster on site. That's always tough these days. But let's agree that all this drywall has to come out, right? And because the mitigation guys, and I love mitigation, by the way. I think if you can save things, save them. but I'm talking about a home fire where everything's black. You're not washing and cleaning the walls, sealing paint. Instead of spending all this money, and on 2 claims that I have right now, the homeowner and was working hard at, oh my gosh, this happened, call a mitigation company, and they were directed by their agent and adjuster. And the amount of the drying bill pushed them over policy limits.
Right.
And the reconstruction was completely under policy limits by 20 grand, but now it's 20,000 over because there's a $40,000 bill. And they're like, what, how do I not have this coverage? And it's like, well, everything they dried is being torn out, right? There's not a roof on this house. Why were you there's not a roof.
It's like the injected dry. I always laughed at when I see someone trying to save with the injected dry system. I'm like, you guys, we're gonna pay $300 to save $100 worth of drywall and paint.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's always kind of an interesting, and that's just in the water losses. But
and that was more of a with the injector dry. I love that tool, and but it was used just like across the board.
Yeah.
Right. Without the thought process of, are we actually going to save this? And so you would get these drying bills for drying hardwood floors that are coming out. Right.
Yeah.
Now, if you have a small area, you know,
makes sense.
God bless you, go for it.
Yeah.
You know? But you know, really think about what you're doing. So let me run down my list here. You know, because we are getting close to the end here. I think we're at 26 minutes. So a couple things to look at that potentially could have you be underinsured, and I'm telling you, a lot of you are. A lot of you are, especially in the Seattle market. It is so expensive to get people to do your work. One of my old partners, if you will, she was from Omaha, Nebraska, and she'd be like, well, you know, we get guys for, you know, $35, $45, you know, and pay our project man. I'm like, well, welcome to the Seattle market.
Right.
You're not going to get a guy to fog a mirror for this, but you know, your older policies, if you have not gone through and updated those, you're probably going to be in trouble. And you know, you can get evaluation from them. They can come out, look at that, get your riders on your additional materials, guns, jewelry. Those are huge, huge problems. I bet you if you looked at your policy right now and you've never done anything with them, you may have $10,000 worth of coverage on guns. I'm not going to say I have more than $10,000. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. But or in weapons.
Right.
But it's important to know that you're covered. Property value is a way to look at it. Take out the actual dirt part of your property statement and see, like, hey, it says that my home is valued at, you know, that the dwelling is valued at $300,000. If I can tell you this right now, if you have a 3,000 square foot home, just say minimum full burned down house is going to minimum, by the way, is going to start at around $200 a square foot.
Wow. Okay.
That's for a nice home.
Minimum.
That's not over the top home.
Right.
But that's for a decent home with nice amenities. And so that's a $600,000 policy. These are real easy round numbers. I take an average of our jobs. And so if I have 40 jobs averaging X amount, then I can look at the square footage of each one and come up with kind of a snapshot of what these homes cost to rebuild per square foot. So you can look at your property value. You know, if your home's valued, we get these homes that are valued at 1.2, 1.5 million in Seattle that people bought for $400,000 or $500,000, you know, 8 years ago. And you know, are they keeping up with the pace? And most, from what I'm seeing, are not.
Right.
Check your policy. That's the easiest thing. And policies are really easy to read. There's a lot. You know, you get so much paperwork with them, but you know, what's the coverage page?
Deck page, the
declaration page, right? That's why I have John here, right? And so you check that page and look at that, and maybe call a decent contractor and say, hey, look, I've got this house, and this is what I'm insured for. I'm insured for $300,000.
Yeah,
You got a 3,000 square foot house near, you know, call your agent and say, I want it. Improvements, right? Improvements are really big. I extended my shop and put, it was a very old building, right? Built back in the 70s, cinder block. I put all new trusses, all new roofing, all new metal siding, stone veneer around the whole deal. And after this windstorm, when my tree hit my neighbor, I called my agent. I said, what is that thing insured for? And she said, it's insured for like $78,000. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
The siding and the roof and that brickwork was that.
Right.
Right. And so yeah, I sent them pictures. I sent them interior pictures, exterior pictures, and they bumped it up to 200,000.
Yeah.
Which is close, to get it back basic. And so yeah,
It's that peace of mind too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's you're back. It's back to gambling. Like
It is.
If you got trees on your property, or you're doing stuff in your shop, welding or doing some real projects
Mm-hmm.
or whatnot, and you have a heater in there, or whatever you have flammables in there, you want to make sure have some peace of mind about it, right?
Absolutely.
So that's great.
So I think we've kind of covered everything that was going to be on the list today. I know we kind of veered left, veered right, contents, and no, it's a good thing though, because they all come together.
Right.
Your structure, your contents, get an evaluation of your contents once you do have an episode or an incident at your home, and then get your rebuild evaluation done. The other thing you can do is just do a Google search of home building cost, and but understand home building cost is including dirt work, foundation, and your utilities, and so many of those items when you rebuild a home you're not touching. And the last thing though, we do have 2 homes, and we've done probably 8 that they're super old homes, and they were total homes, like you're taking them all the way down to the foundation, but in order to rebuild, to bring them up to code, we actually have to dig in the whole perimeter of the home and put in footings.
Oh,
Because old school was just pour the concrete straight up and down. Now you've got to put some kickers in there and to bring it up to code. So there you go again, right? And that would fall under code coverage, which is another policy.
Which also has some limitations.
It does.
Right?
It
So
does.
you got to be familiar with what you have, not go to a cutthroat. We never even talked about this. Some of these policies that are so cheap are cheap because they're a small company.
Run.
Yeah. And a lot of these smaller companies, if there is a big disaster, they're done. They are also gambling on that. Now there's some reinsurance involved, and I won't bore you with what reinsurance is. And I once had this. I took these teenagers out on a road trip out on the peninsula once, and they were like, "Hey, what do you do for work?" I said, "Oh, I do insurance, and I talk about this, and there's policies." And then, did you know that your insurance even has insurance itself? It's called reinsurance.
Right.
And he goes, "Can you change the radio station?" That was his answer to me. And I go, "Okay." And people don't like to talk about insurance or reinsurance for that matter, but yeah, it's difficult. You are exchanging peace of mind sometimes with which insurance company you work with, and some of the smaller ones are great to work with your auto.
There's
Right?
some very good ones.
A lot.
I actually use Next Insurance for a few of my things for my son's company, and they've been really solid.
Yeah.
And very good rates. Would I use them on my home? I don't even think they offer it, but
Well-
and that's not a plug for Next, but I like them, and
And the scene is changing, and we'll end with this too. Or I keep popcorning, but there's companies out there that won't even send someone out to your home anymore.
no.
They literally have you take a picture, and they put your contents list or your damages into an algorithm, and if it meets a certain criteria, they direct deposit you money right away. And even some of them say, "Well, we're going to take a part of your premium, and we're going to donate it to the charity of your choice, so that you don't." And I think it's because they want you to feel guilty if you try to defraud them, right?
Could be.
But anyway, but there's a lot of companies out there that can make it difficult to work with, and have a mitigation company come in or construction company come in and say, "Hey, here's what we need," and they don't understand it. And ultimately, what it comes down to, and what we try to focus on in our podcast, and I don't know if we've made it that far to be clear about that, but is communicate. Right? You just got to communicate your story, tell your story. We'll be talking a lot about that. We'll bring in some guests. Document.
That's a big one.
Tell your story.
I don't. If it was just I talked to him over the phone, he said go. I'm like, no, that phone call never happened.
Per our discussion.
That's right.
I don't know how many.
I send that out every day.
I don't know how many emails I start with per our discussion.
Right.
So document, communicate, email. If it didn't happen, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen.
That's right.
So, and what's the other adage? Write it down as if you are reading it in a court deposition in front of your grandmother.
Oh.
Right?
That's awesome.
No language, no foul language. Put your notes in there like you would have to answer for them, and that's really is true. So same goes for construction companies, homeowners, and insurance adjusters. So
that's really good. Right there.
Anyway. All right, let's close it down. Thank you for watching. Join us soon. We will bring on some guests. We're going to bring on some local people here in the next coming weeks and talk about some of their successful strategies as far as being successful in this industry. And we'll be more. Reach out to us and let us know if you have any topics you'd like us to touch on. So thanks for watching or listening.
John, thank you all. Have a great day.